Yeah, yeah. Apparently they faded it all down and they're going to fade it all back up again. They did it purposely, just so that I did it purposely. Yeah.
That's on.
Yeah, but
And again.
Okay, yeah, good, thanks.
Yeah.
All seems to be working.
All right, lovely. We'll leave you to it then.
No, thanks. Cheers.
Good afternoon, everybody. Could you take your seats now, ready to start for this afternoon's? The hearing will begin shortly. May I remind you to check your mobile phones and any other electrical equipment you may have that it's on silent. And remind members of the public and reporters in the hearing room are not permitted to use any electronic devices during the hearing. And move to the annex if you wish to do that. And also remind you that no food or drink may be consumed in the hearing room apart from the water provided. So that's the short version for the afternoon. Thank you very much.
Yes, Mr. Whitelaw.
Afternoon, sir. Commander Murphy, we left off just before lunch, having dealt with the overnight activities and then the morning activities of the Skripals on the 4th of March. If we could now move to the point of where they left home, by reference to paragraph 113 of your witness statement, what did Julia Skripal say about who closed the door when they left the house on the Sunday?
Yes, thank you. So in respects of both of them on the Sunday, they left at slightly different times. So Sergei was ready slightly earlier, so he left early and appeared to go outside and close the door. And then shortly after that, Julia left and closed and locked the door behind her as she left.
As we did this morning, I'm now going to take you to a series of extracts from the interviews, addressing more particularly in the Skripal's own words, how they left the house for what would be the last time on Sunday, the 4th of March. So if we could start, please, by going to INQ 005761, page 15, and this is Julia's police interview that we saw previously of the 16th of April 2018. And am I right to suggest that there's a caveat to this interview in that Julia thought they left the house at about 2, whereas other evidence Wadana investigated suggests that it was about half an hour earlier than that?
Yes, that's correct.
So if we start there where she says, and at 2 o'clock we wanted to go out, the interviewer asks her, so you said you planned, you talked about what you were going to do. When had you planned? Was that the night before you sat chatting about what you were going to do? And Julia says, we started to talk about it the night before. And again, we talked in the morning, what time? The interviewer says, so you knew what you were going to do? You knew you were going to your favourite pub? And Julia says, yes. Take the car. And Julia continues, to the pub, then to the restaurant. Then we wanted to go to Sainsbury's to buy lots of food and drive the car back home. Wait for the plumber, have some steaks maybe in the evening, things like this. The interviewer says, so your dad's gone for a shower. What are you doing while he's in the shower? And she says, I was getting dressed, making my hair dried, making sure when he got out of the shower, he had enough time while I was preparing everything. He had enough time to get dressed, to go downstairs, sit in the car and wait for me. So the interviewer says, okay, so he sat waiting for you. Yes, outside of the car. And the reason you didn't walk into town was because, Julia says, because we were too lazy and we wanted to buy lots of food. That's why we wanted to take the car to put all the bags in the trunk. So you leave the house at 2 o'clock, and how long had your dad been sat in the car waiting? And Julia says, maybe 5 minutes. It wasn't long. And then we go over to page 16. And how did you get out of the house? And Julia says, through the front door. I closed the door. Okay, so when you say you closed the door, that's the porch door. Julia says the porch door because the second one is, so you just shut the first one. Yes, just shut. Second one is the porch. Yes, with a key. And the interviewer asks, how did you get the key? And Julia says, usually when we are inside the house, we put the key in the lock the door for the night, and leave the key hanging there. In the lock, yes, she says. In the morning, when we open the door, we just open it to go outside, and outside you lock it and take the key with you. And then if we go to page 17, where the interviewer says, so is it right in my saying, at the top there, on the Saturday, when your dad locked the door, the front door, he left the keys in the lock? Julia says, in the evening, yes. Yeah, in the porch lock, yeah. Okay, and shut the main house door, yeah. Then the interviewer asks, and then the Sunday morning, he's gone out just before you because you're still sorting your hair out? Julia says, yep. And he's opened the front door. Julia says, the front door, the door of the porch. And he's left the keys there. And Julia says, but he put the keys outside already for me to get out and just lock the door. So when I went out, I just had to close the door and turn the key because it was already outside in the lock. Okay, he put it there for me. And the interviewer asks, but you explained earlier about the handle. You had to put the handle up. And Julia says, the handle up and lock and get the keys. And then the interviewer goes on to ask, and when you when you get in the car, what do you do with the keys? And Yulia says, I give them to my dad. Then if we could move down to page 18, she says he puts them in his pocket. And then Yulia says, he opens the door, puts the key outside for the last one who leaves the house needs to close it. I was closing, I put the handle up, closed the door, took the keys and gave it to my dad. So, Commander Murphy, do we see there an explanation for how both Sergei went out first, as you indicated earlier, and then Yulia comes later, and he's left the key for her, and she closes the door behind her?
Yes, that's correct. In that account, as I say, Sergei was 5 minutes outside in the vehicle, left the keys for Yulia, and then when Yulia came out, she closed the door and locked it, which involved, as I described earlier, lifting the handle and turning the key.
If we could then go to INQ 005768 at page 30, and this is a police interview with Yulia Skripal, in fact, when she was in hospital on the 30th of March, so earlier than the previous one, but we're looking here again at what you've just described, the process of locking the front door. So at page 30, about halfway down, where it begins, so that's where it was. So you take the key off, you lock the front door, and how do you lock the front door? Does Yulia here describe the way in which it's necessary to push the lever to lock the door?
Yes, she does, yes.
So we can see there the interviewer saying, how do you lock your front door? And Yulia Skripal says, it's easy, you just push the lever up. To lock the door, turn the key, lift the lever up, turn the key to lock it. And do you touch anything else when you go outside? And she said, I don't remember, but I don't think so. And then over to page 31 of the same interview, just to complete the picture of Yulia getting into the car. The interviewer goes, you opened the door, and do you remember, or how do you open your door on the BMW? And Yulia says, it's easy, you just pull it. A bit further down, the interviewer asks, did you open it with your left hand? Here it was my right hand. And then further down again, when I went out, it was facing ready to go. I think she's talking about the direction of the vehicle there.
Yeah.
And the interviewer says, so you walked round to the passenger side with your right hand, you open the door. Yeah, and then you get in, put your seatbelt on, I imagine. Yeah, sure. Of course, give the key to your dad, because obviously he'd been waiting for a few minutes. Yeah, because you've already been getting ready, and you say, because you've been getting ready, and you say he was a bit cross. Yes. So there is Yulia describing getting into the BMW, opening the door with her right hand, putting her seatbelt on, and giving the key to her father.
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
And if we could now go to INQ 005752, please. This is an interview with Sergei Skripal on the 24th of May 2018. And at page 6, I think it's about the 5th entry where the interviewer says, okay, so what you're saying is you left the house first, and this is obviously with Sergei Skripal, and you touched the handle to get out. Sergei Skripal says, yes. When you unlocked the handle and then you then got out the house, yes, you're telling me you shut the door behind you using the handle. And Sergei Skripal says, yes. So it looks as if both of them touched the door, shut it on their way out.
Yes, absolutely. This was a significant milestone, really, to try and understand, having found the door, how both could get contaminated touching the door. And in their early accounts, they both accounted for that. So he comes out, shuts the door, shuts that outside front door behind him using the handle, and then Yulia comes out and closes it again and locks it with the key. So both touching the handle.
Thank you. And we'll look for their own words on this. We'll look to the rest of this part of the interview. So the interviewer saying, you're then telling me you shut the door behind you using the handle. Sergei Skripal says, yes. Okay, and you then went to your car and you used your hand, obviously, to open the car door, got in, put your seatbelt on, and then manoeuvred the car round so it's facing the right direction. And at that stage, Yulia came out and shut the door, and Sergei says, yes, locked it, then came to the car and gave you the key. Is that right? Correct. So the interviewer says, so what you're saying to me is that both of you, well, you know for definite you touched the door handle on your way out. And Sergei Skripal says, absolutely, sure. And the interviewer says, so are you sure you touched the handle on the way out? Sergei Skripal again says, sure. And the interviewer says, and you also believe that Yulia locked the door, and Sergei Skripal said, yes, because I didn't see, because I sit in waiting, come in okay, but she cannot, because explained, my handle, it's necessary up, it has a lock. Yeah. And then over to page 7, Sergei Skripal says, she get up close to the handle, turn the lock, in the key after. The interviewer says, so what you're indicating is that so to shut the door, you have to shut it, lift the handle up. Sergei Skripal, yes. The interviewer, and then turn the key. Sergei Skripal says she had to. No, another, no way, nothing impossible, close another. So it seems to be suggesting that she had to do that in order to lock the door and come out.
Yes, absolutely.
So there's another reference to the same point, but I won't go to it. But for your reference, it's INQ 005756 and pages 2 to 3. If we could, however, now just go to INQ 005819. This is the graphics pack on page 88. Does this show the front door leading to the porch and interior door as described by the Skripals in interview?
Yes, absolutely. I think in the middle picture there you could just see the small porch inside where you'll see the inner door. But yes, this is the outside door that we've just been referring to with the lifted handle.
I think possibly the photo at the bottom assisting in seeing the handle.
Yes.
And how that might operate. Thank you very much. So we're going to come back later in the inquiry to the levels of Novichok found and in which locations as part of Operation Madonna, but is it right to say in broad terms that Novichok firstly was found at Christie Miller Road?
Yes.
With levels inside the house suggesting it could have been caused post-incident by cross-contamination?
Yes.
But the levels on the door handle being sufficiently high to indicate direct contact with the nerve agent.
Yes, I think I mentioned before we took to calling it ground zero as the point of contamination, that the levels were sufficiently high on the door handle as to be that point of contamination.
We'll now move on to the Skripal's journey once they left Christie Miller Road. So for that, could we go back to the graphics pack, INQ 005819 and page 67, please? Before we go back to the audio-visual presentation, and by way of introduction to this section, could you just describe what this map and the images show? And if you need to ask for it to be highlighted, please do.
That's fine. So this map shows the general area, so it encompasses the location of the house and then all the locations in the town centre that we know that Sergei and Yulia visited on that day, and then eventually where they were found as unwell. And you'll also notice that we've highlighted some of the cameras that the specific photographs you'll see in this picture come from as part of that CCTV work. So on the left-hand side is the home address, the right-hand side, Salisbury Town Centre.
So the red box we can see Christie
Address.
Miller Road, the home address.
Yep.
Is the green line, does a solid green line represent what was seen on CCTV cameras in terms of the route?
Yeah, so that's what we call in this package the observed route. And then the dotted green line is what we think is the suggested route. We don't have CCTV specifically showing that route, but we've got points at the beginning and the end that indicate where they went.
And presumably you have the timings as well, so
Yes.
if they were to go divert too much, then it wouldn't fit with the timings.
Yes, for all intents and purposes, time journeys, locations, sightings, their own account, we understand what the suggested route means.
So I think we're about to see this route on the audio-visual, but it is, am I right in thinking it's going from Christie Miller Road to the Sainsbury's car park?
Yes, that's correct.
That's the vehicle leaving Christie Miller Road, passing Devizes Inn, going towards the car park, and then we'll pick it up then.
Yes.
Thank you. If we could then go to the audio-visual presentation at INQ 006034, thank you. And we're going to play from 3.27 to 6.11, please.
On Sunday, the 4th of March 2018, Sergei and Yulia Skripal travelled into Salisbury Centre in Sergei Skripal's vehicle. At 13:33, Sergei Skripal drove north along India Avenue towards the junction with Devizes Road. They continued along Devizes Road towards St Paul's Roundabout, then east towards Summerlock Approach. At 13:37, the vehicle turned left into Summerlock Approach. The Skripals entered the Sainsbury's car park, driving up the ramp from the lower deck to the top floor.
Thank you. So we've seen there Sergei Skripal's vehicle leaving the vicinity of Christie Miller Road about 13:33, travelling to the Sainsbury's car park, arriving there about 13:38. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
And did Yulia in her interview confirm that the route they took from Christie Miller Road to Sainsbury's was into India Avenue and then into Devizes Road?
Yes, I believe so.
And I think a counter-terrorism police officer also drove the route just to confirm the timings.
Yes, I've driven that route myself many times as well and confirmed the timings.
And you mentioned, I think, earlier in your evidence about the vehicles being tested for Novichok, and I think that vehicle was subsequently tested, is that right?
Correct.
And did show levels of Novichok.
Yes, that's right.
So if we could resume the audiovisual now from 6:11 till, or 6:13, sorry, till 7:54, please.
Yulia Skripal exited from the front passenger seat and waited whilst Sergei Skripal parked. Sergei Skripal exited the car a short time later, before returning to place an item believed to be a parking ticket onto the dashboard before walking off. At 13:41, the Skripals walked together through the Maltings shopping area towards the River Avon, where they stood by the railings. Sergei Skripal began feeding the birds. He can be seen passing bread to a boy standing nearby.
Thank you. If we could pause there. So here we see Sergei Skripal handing bread to feed the ducks to a boy at about 1342.
Yes.
If we could go to page 69 of the graphics pack, which is INQ 005819, please. We'll have a still image of this moment. Is that the still image that we've just seen?
Yes.
At the top there, we've got the two images, in fact, a close-up passing bread to the boy. Now, we know that Sergei Skripal was contaminated by Novichok at this point.
Yes.
Did counter-terrorism manage to trace the boy on the CCTV? No need, obviously, to name the individual. And, in fact, the two friends he was with as well.
Yes, correct. There were three of them. So efforts were made to try and trace them, knowing that Sergei at this point was contaminated. We did eventually manage to do so. Reporting suggests they had been, all three, in fact, had been ill for a day or two after this. But that illness had passed, and at some point in the future, several weeks later, they were tested, but were not found to have any traces of contamination.
Thank you very much. We'll now resume. We're going to move to the mill, which is where Sergei and Yulia Skripal go next. So we'll resume the audio-visual at INQ 006034 and play, please, from 7:54, where we left off, to 13:10. This is a slightly longer section.
A short time later, the Skripals walked away and continued towards the mill public house. At 13:45, they entered the mill and purchased drinks at the bar. They sat together, engaged in conversation, for half an hour. Upon leaving the pub, the Skripals paused briefly outside.
Thank you. If we could pause there. So just to recap the timings that we've seen there, 1:45 they enter the mill,
Yes.
purchase drinks at the bar. We see them sit for half an hour together in the pub until they get up to leave at about 2:15.
Yes,
And was Novichok found in the mill when subsequently tested?
it was, yes.
And obviously, given that, were the efforts made to trace people who had been in the pub at the time?
It was. There were a lot of effort, yes.
And did Operation Madonna obtain a large number of witness statements from people who were there or had been there?
Yes, we did.
If we could just go to the graphics pack, page 86, so it's INQ 005819. Can you explain to us what we see here?
Yes, so what we see here is where Sergei and Yulia sat. So when you went into the front, if you look at the plan at the bottom of the page, where it says front, this is where you would walk in. Thank you very much. You walk up the first little flight of stairs, which are only half a dozen steps, and then they came straight to the bar here. You'll see it at the bottom of your screen. And then whilst Yulia waited for drinks, Sergei went and sat over where you see the number 27 in the blue circle. That's the table they sat at. They sat there for their half an hour after drinks. They paid cash for their drinks. And then the exit route was down those little steps and back out of the front door the same way they'd come.
Could I just ask you about the table? From the CCTV, it looked as though they were at the table nearer the stairs, and a couple of witness statements from persons at the mill indicate table 28. Are you able to help with that?
No, I think it was table 27. So when you, on the graphics pack, you'll see when Sergei walks over, thank you, to the bar, you see that just behind Yulia's shoulder there on the second photograph in is another table. That appears to be table 28. They were sat on table 27.
Thank you.
Well,
And I think, can we see as well the distance on the map on the left top hand corner between their next destination, Zizi's, and where the mill is?
Yes, it's a short walk. So, in fact, if I go to the second picture, just to come back to the point I was making, you see the bar.
Yep.
There were 3 tables. They're sat on the middle of the 3 tables there.
yeah.
There you go.
Thank you. That's a much better visual. And one can see there why it looks as if it's nearer to
Yes,
the
and
stairs.
you'd be forgiven for thinking this at the bottom of the screen wasn't a table because of the banister of the table,
Yes.
but actually that is the same type of bar table.
Thank you.
as
That does help with that discrepancy. So we were just talking about the short walking distance between Bishop's Mill and Zizi's.
Yes.
And at this point, were you able to observe any sort of signs of illness?
The
between
first
the two?
time, in fact, no, and lots of our effort here, as in addition to trying to track their movements, was partly to try and identify where they may have touched. And you've seen a few times, just in what we've seen so far, they're both touching their faces occasionally. Yulia quite regularly touches her face while she's talking. They are pushing the doors closed and open. They're standing at the bar, handing cash over. So lots of our examinations were about that. The first time we notice, on reflection, there being any difference here is I think Sergei, when he leaves the pub, puts his hands to his face. And I think that's the first time we may see a visible sign. We haven't seen that yet on the graphics pack, but of course we will.
Thank you. So before we resume the audio-visual, with your permission, I'll adduce 2 witness statements of witnesses from the mill. The first is Gregory Townsend, who was the general manager who served Yulia Skripal, although he said he wouldn't have remembered doing it were it not for the fact that he was shown the CCTV the following evening. And his statement is INQ 001211.
Yeah.
And then Emma Dodge was the assistant manager who saw Sergei and Yulia Skripal, although she thought it was table 28, which we've addressed. Her statement, in fact, she has 2 statements, one INQ 004619 and one INQ 004621.
Right.
Thank you very much. So we're going to now resume the audio-visual and play from 1310 to 1358, please.
They then walk together through the Maltings and Market Walk, passing the library steps and entering Zizi just before 1419. There is no CCTV from inside the Zizi restaurant.
Thank you. Commander Murphy, having just heard that, could you just summarise for us what the investigation found in terms of their actions within Zizi's?
Yes, thank you. So, having entered Zizi's, I think it was a lot busier than they were expecting it to be. So there were some issues with tables and where they were sat. So the staff found them a table. They sat at that table. They ordered some drinks and some food. It is during this time in Zizi's where they first started to both notice some symptoms that in hindsight were clearly from the nerve agent poisoning, but at that time just were relatively mild symptoms. But unfortunately, because it was so busy, there were lots of issues in the restaurant that day. They didn't get served very quickly. They got their drinks and some starters, but they waited a prolonged period of time. Both were feeling a little unwell by this point and had waited a very long time for their main courses, so decided to leave. There was a discussion with the manager at the time about not paying for their food because the manager accepted the delay of that service. Yulia had stepped outside just ahead of Sergei because she was feeling a little unwell at that point. They were beginning to experience more symptoms, and then they left shortly after. So forgive me, I can't remember the amount of time they were in Zizi's, but they were in there for a while they were waiting for courses. But
Well, I think we see they enter Zizi's sometime after 1419. We'll come
Yes.
to that in a moment. So again, and particularly in this case, because of there being no CCTV from inside Zizi's, I would ask to adduce into evidence, with your permission, a few of the relevant witness statements from the very large number of statements that were obtained.
Yes.
They are, I think this may be the manager referred to, it's the supervisor at Zizi's, Brendan Mackey, INQ 004951,
Mackie.
MACKEY.
Yep.
He was a supervisor at Zizi's, and he interacted with Sergei Skripal, whom he said was at table 37 and asking for his bill because he was unhappy with the service. He also seated them and served their drinks, but he didn't remember that. He says, at no point when I saw them did I think they were unwell. The second statement I'd ask to adduce is Chloe Pattinson, who is the assistant manager, who indeed gave three witness statements. The key witness statement is INQ 004603. There's also INQ 004604, which deals with her recollection of their phones, and INQ 004605, which corrects an error in the timing of she refers to in the first witness statement. She also deals with her interactions with the Skripals, again says they were unhappy with the service. She describes Yulia ordering prawns and Sergei calamari and says they'd shared some garlic bread from what she could see on the table. She said she told them they didn't have to pay given the time they'd waited for their food, and she describes them speaking in Russian as well. And the third statement is Andrew Nealon, Nealon, a customer at Zizi's who said he saw a couple whom he later realised was the Skripals. His statement is INQ 004926, and he describes the female in the couple stumbling slightly as they left the restaurant.
Right.
Thank you. And if we could then resume the audio-visual and play from 1358 to the end. Thank you.
At 1534, they left Zizi and walked towards Market Walk. They passed the steps of Salisbury Library, turned into Market Walk, and walked through the Maltings. At 15:36, they sat down on a bench where they became seriously ill.
Thank you. So we saw Skripals enter Zizi sometime after 1419, and if we could go to INQ 005819, page 71, and image 10, that should show us that. So this is the
Yes.
timing before they enter Zizi, is that
Yes,
correct?
that's just as they turned left off the pathway into the front of the restaurant.
Thank you. And then if we could go to page 87 of the same document, please. And you've heard me indicate that one of the witness statements we've adduced said that they sat at table 37. Is that highlighted in the plan in much the
Yes.
same way as we saw with the mill, but
Yes.
as to where they were sitting?
Correct.
And how was that established, given the absence of CCTV? Was that from the witness statements, or how did Wadano establish that?
Yes, it was. So this was a very large and quite complicated scene, as I'm sure you can imagine, trying to understand how you could test for Novichok in a room like this with the number of people that were in there at the time. So some of our initial testing required us to go back to the staff and over time try and map out where everybody was in the restaurant. And it took a little while, but eventually we identified it was table 37 as a result of the witness testimony.
And I think you referred in an earlier tranche of your evidence to the twofold purpose of investigating scenes such as this. One, obviously, to establish how the Skripals became ill, but also for public safety, to ascertain who was there and may have been contaminated as a result of contact.
Yes, just as an example, on the Monday afternoon when we were discussing the developing picture of where Sergei and Yulia had been, we were extremely concerned with making sure that we could trace anybody who was in both the pub and the restaurant to ensure that they could be spoken to and check their welfare and well-being on the basis that at this point we knew Sergei and Yulia were poisoned, and as a result of being contaminated, were touching things that were likely to then have cross-contamination. So, yeah, a large part of our considerations throughout this was in addition to where were they poisoned and what could it tell us about what happened, is how could we identify members of the public that may need some support and assistance.
And this was obviously the last place they'd been to before they went to the bench, so early
Correct.
on in the investigation, looking at whether they could have been contaminated there, and taking it back, as you've said, to establish the clean, dirty line.
Yes, that's exactly right. So from the point at which they were discovered, it perhaps would have been tempting to be moving around everywhere they had been, but of course what we needed to do was try and work backwards from the point at which they fell ill on the bench to the places they had been in stages, to ensure that we didn't miss anything that was significant, plus also pick up any of those additional public health and safety concerns that were a factor for us. So Zizi's became the immediate focus of some of our work beyond the bench, because clearly they had been there immediately before they fell ill.
I think we saw that the Skripals left Zizi's about 15:34, made their way to the maltings, where they sat on the bench at 15:36.
Yes.
And we're going to hear evidence from tomorrow onwards about the emergency response of both members of the public and the emergency services to their collapse. But having addressed the movements of the Skripals on Saturday the 3rd and Sunday the 4th of March, I'd like to take you to a document produced by the Embassy of the Russian Federation to the United Kingdom, and it's called 5 Years of Unanswered Questions. If we could go to INQ 004576, thank you, page 1. Are you familiar with this document?
I am, yes.
And in fact, were there various versions of this document provided by the Russian embassy over the course of the investigation?
Yes, there were.
We see this one is dated March 2023.
Yes.
Am I right in thinking there have been some much earlier ones in rather similar form?
Yes, indeed.
Yes, that's correct, sir. Yes. I think there's a very early one in the investigation. I think there were several others along the way. So.
Right.
We'll come back to this document, but I would like to deal with a couple of points with you within it, which have touched upon matters that we've discussed today, please. If we could go to page 23. And in a section you see at the top there entitled 3, Day of the Incident, it says, to check the credibility of the British narrative, it's useful to compare the timelines of known movements of the Skripals and the prime suspects on the 3rd and 4th of March 2018. Do we see there set out a table with some timings and movements?
We do.
We're going to come later in the inquiry to focus on the movements of the suspects. So for now, if we could focus on the left-hand column and just compare the timings of the movements of the Skripals to what we've confirmed through your evidence was established by Wadana. So if we'll start, please, we see Saturday, the 3rd of March, at the top. I'm going to start there with the first entry on the left-hand side, which is 1440. It says, Yulia arrives at Heathrow Airport from Moscow. So did we see today on the audio-visual presentation that at 14:54, Yulia was seen arriving off the plane into Heathrow Terminal 4?
Yes.
So that's roughly right.
I would imagine that's the landing time
Quite.
of the aircraft, so yes.
Yep.
And then we see that there's no detail beyond that, where it says 4:15 on the left-hand column for Sergei and Yulia's Skripal movements on the Saturday, the 3rd of March. But we, of course, have seen on the CCTV today the timings I mentioned to you earlier, with Yulia collecting her baggage at 16:29, 16:34 meeting Sergei Skripal, 16:38 leaving the terminal building with the Cassidys, meeting Maureen Cassidy at the ticket machine, and the Cassidys and the Skripals leaving the airport in Ross Cassidy's vehicle and travelling to Christie Miller Road. So firstly, is it right that Wadana was able to obtain evidence which covers that period?
Yes, that's right, yes.
And was Wadana then able to place Yulia at Christie Miller Road at about 6 o'clock through various sources of evidence, including CCTV, Yulia's phone connecting to the router, the witness evidence of the Skripals themselves and the Cassidys?
Yes, that's correct.
So then if we look to Sunday, the 4th of March, we see that the Russian narrative in that column on the left alleges that at 9:15 Sergei's car was seen in the area of London Road, Churchill Way North and Wilton Road. If we could just please go to a document INQ 005775 and page 4.
5075.
5775
Thank you.
and page 4. So this is the timeline we saw previously, but if we could make bigger the bottom box on that page, it says, John Hiles, a retired minister, believes he was following the victim's vehicle southbound on the A30 London Road, 4th March 2018, approximately 9:15. What inquiries did Wadana make about this, and with what result, please?
I went to see Mr. Hiles, actually. We've seen him a couple of times, but to have a discussion with him on what he said he saw. So he's made a statement and says that whilst he was travelling, it would be quite close to the cemetery in Salisbury, where he said he thought he saw Sergei and Yulia's vehicle. We obviously know that was not the case, and the vehicle didn't move, in fact, that morning at all. So whilst it was a very helpful call for him to make it, unfortunately it was an erroneous sighting of that vehicle.
So it was a line of inquiry that you followed up.
Yes.
And ultimately discounted because of other evidence demonstrating actually that they were at the house.
Yes.
Thank you. If we could then go back to INQ 004576, page 23, while we do that, were there a number of such lines of inquiry over the course of the investigation that you investigated and either helped you move in the right direction or were red herrings or
Absolutely. So on an investigation this size, particularly when you're appealing to the public, of course, you'll receive an awful lot of phone calls from people that wish to report things to you that they think are suspicious or important to your investigation, and rightly you investigate all of those leads and work out whether any of them are important or not. This is a good example of one. And another example of how we might have shown this was we also then checked CCTV to see if I believe his name is Mr. Hiles's sighting was relevant, but obviously we found no evidence of the vehicle moving on CCTV.
Are you very approximately able to quantify sort of how many calls you may have received over the course of the investigation with this sort of information?
Many hundreds, if not thousands, of calls at different times and places. Not so many about the vehicle, by the way, but an awful lot more broadly about the incident and our inquiries.
Thank you. So just resuming there, we've dealt with the 9:15 entry, and then we get to 11:48 onwards, and it says there, Sergei and Yulia's mobile phones are switched off for 4 hours. Can you help us with that?
Well, we know that not to be the case. So we have the digital material, which demonstrates their consistent use of devices throughout this period of time. We clearly have their statements as well that describe their movements of that morning. But outside of Sergei and Yulia's recollections, we support that with all of our digital material.
Thank you, and I'll just go to...
Have we actually, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to remember. Have we actually seen this morning evidence of the use of one or other or either of those two mobile phones during that period?
Yes, sir. And also laptops and iPads.
Certainly laptops and iPads
Yes.
at home. Also the phones?
I believe Yulia's phone, so we'd have to go back and revisit, but I believe Yulia's phone, not Sergei's. He was not a big user of his mobile phone, as we discussed.
No, he wasn't.
But during this period of time was when they were surfing for YouTube videos on Russian, I believe the Russian version of YouTube.
Thank you.
So we'll also go now, if we may, to the accounts of, first of all, Sergei Skripal, which is INQ 006086, page 1. And this is the recent statement of Sergei Skripal provided to the inquiry so that he could answer particular questions. And I'm just going to read through this. So this witness statement is made to assist the Dawn Sturgess inquiry with the matter set out in a Rule 9 request sent to me on the 27th of August 2024. I've not answered all the questions in the order they were posed. My solicitors supported me in my preparation of this statement. Most of this statement is within my own knowledge, and I believe the facts stated are true. Where I've derived information from other sources, I say so, and that information is true to the best of my knowledge and belief. So Sergei Skripal says, first of all, he never knew Dawn Sturgess personally, but is very sorry that she died. It's a tragic thing that has happened, and sends condolences to her friends and family. He says, I've seen some documents while preparing my statement. The inquiry gave these to my solicitors. I mention a few of these documents and their unique reference numbers below. I have reminded myself of some parts of my interviews with the police in 2018, but I've not reread them all. The things I'm being asked about happened 60 or more years ago. My memory of some of them is not good. This may be because of the effects of the poison I was exposed to in 2018, or because of my health, age, and time passing. I do not believe there's more I can say about these questions. And then if we go to page 4, where it's part 2, events on the Sunday, the 4th of March, 2018, paragraph 11, page 4, please. At paragraph 11, he says, I've been shown 2 pages from what seems to be the transcript of a meeting between Charles Rowley and the Russian ambassador. He gives inquiry reference numbers. The ambassador says about me and Yulia that our telephones were switched off for 3 hours, and nobody knows what they did. I think he's talking about the morning of Sunday, 4th of March, the day we were poisoned, but I do not think what he says is true. I rarely switched off my mobile telephone. It was working all the time. I plugged it in to charge, switched on. And then at paragraph 12, I've been asked to look at a timeline which apparently shows my computer and Yulia's devices were used on the morning of the 4th of March. I find this document hard to read and not very helpful. I do not now remember using my computer that day. I remember that every month I transferred some money, maybe £500, to Yulia's British bank account, even when she was in Moscow. Maybe I went to my bank account to do that on the 4th of March 2018 because it was a new month, or just because she was visiting. I use the internet seldom, and Yulia sometimes used my computer, so it's possible some of the usage was not by me. I did not use Yulia's devices on the 4th of March 2018 or at all during her visit. I do not remember mentioning my and Yulia's plan for that day, 21. Then he goes on at paragraph 13. My main memory is that I woke up before Yulia, showered, shaved, and went downstairs for a light breakfast. I went outside to change the direction of the BMW. The weather was better with less snow, so I got ready to drive us to the centre of Salisbury for lunch. I stayed at home all morning and did not drive anywhere until we got ready to set off to go for lunch together. Yulia never drove the car at all on her March 2018 visit. When she comes from Moscow, I do the driving. There are different regulations in Russia, and by March 2018, she liked driving cars only if they had automatic gearboxes, and our BMW had a stick. Nobody else had access to our car. If someone says our car was on London Road, they're wrong. That is the other side of Salisbury near the cemetery, not on the way to Sainsbury's car park. We planned to visit the cemetery, but we never did it because of the attack. I can also confirm we did not visit Oak Furniture Land during Yulia's visit, and I don't remember a shop with that name. So is there anything in that account of Sergei Skripal's that is inconsistent with the findings of Opradana?
No, not at all. I mentioned the Oak Furniture Land references because of another member of the public who called us to say they believed Sergei and you had visited Oak Furniture Land, or they'd seen someone in there with strong Russian accents. And again, that was just another example of the inquiries we conducted to show that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then if we can go back to the document we were looking at previously, the 5 years of unanswered questions, INQ 004576. Sorry, could we go a bit back to the table? It was above, I think, the previous page. Thank you. And then if we go down, we'll see the column we've seen about the mobile phones. Then 1:30, Sergei's car is seen driven down Devizes Road towards the town centre. And did we see on the audio-visual Sergei Skripal's vehicle leaving the vicinity of Christie Miller Road at around 1:33 and travelling to the Sainsbury's car park, arriving at about 1:38?
Yes, we did.
Just before you move on, I'm sorry to go back. 9:15, car seen, it is suggested, in the area of London Road, Churchill Way North and Wilton Road. We've all, I dare say, seen the maps. And your note on the timeline suggested, I think, that the sighting was of the car, or a car, travelling southbound on London Road. Is that right?
Sorry, sir, just to clarify the last
Southbound
bit.
on London Road?
Yes, so when...
that would be coming into town, would it?
Yes, in that direction, I believe, sir. It's out by the cemetery. I'm afraid I can't tell you whether that was going out of town or into town.
In any event, the question I really wanted to ask was simply this. Have any of those roads got closed-circuit television cameras on them that you were able to check?
The closed-circuit cameras that we checked were the ones that would have captured the vehicle leaving Christie Miller Road, sir.
Quite.
So the same ones we've seen here.
Yep.
That would have demonstrated the vehicle leaving, and we found no trace of it.
Right. Yes, got it. It didn't leave. Thank you. I'm sorry, Miss Whitelaw.
Not at all. And then we've dealt with the timings already. We've got approximate timings there, and we've dealt with the specific timings in relation to the mill and ZZ's. So
Yes.
I won't go through that. But I would like to move now, please, to some text at the bottom of the table, which will go on to the next page in a minute. It says, as one can immediately see, the movements of both the victims and the suspects are known only to a limited extent. And I remind ourselves that this is the document that's been produced by the Russian embassy.
Yes.
it says it's hard to explain the reluctance by the police to publish a clearer picture that would help alleviate multiple doubts. Among the many omissions of information which is clearly available to the investigation, one may mention the following, and I'd like to deal with a few of these paragraphs with you, please. So the first paragraph said, while some movements are published with extreme accuracy, others are not. Notably, Mr. Skripal's car movements in the morning are only described as being in the area of London Road, Churchill Way North and Wilton Road. This description potentially encompasses a significant area stretching for over 4 miles from Salisbury's western to its northeastern outskirts, the latter point being at 5 miles drive from Porton Down. Further, it's unclear in which direction the car was moving and how much time this journey took. Commander Murphy, could you just address that in light of the evidence that we've seen this morning, please?
Yes, pretty much as we've been discussing, actually. So that sighting turned out to be entirely erroneous, and we can show that Sturgess' vehicle didn't leave until 1:30 that day, and we know the exact route that he drove down India Avenue and into Devizes Road and then in towards the town centre. So a very limited journey of around about 7 or 8 minutes to get to Sainsbury's car park.
And when you say you know the exact route, that's because of mapping the journey through observed points and
Yes.
filling in the gaps with the inferred route.
Yes, and obviously subsequently their own account.
Yes, thank you. Their own accounts both being that they didn't leave 47 Christie Miller Road that morning.
Yes.
And you've already said that I think that there wasn't any evidence that the vehicle left Christie Miller Road earlier that morning.
No, that's correct.
The second paragraph on that page, please, says, the obscure nature of the Skripal's morning trip is accentuated by the alleged fact of their mobile phones being switched off for 4 hours. There's been no attempt either on the part of the investigation or the Skripals themselves to explain the unusual decision to switch off the phones, thus precluding anyone from knowing their exact itinerary. There's also been no attempt to explain the fact of absence of more precise CCTV data on this trip. Again, if you could just respond to that suggestion, please.
Yes, so there's no suggestion the phones were switched off at all. In fact, I believe they were connected to it. Whilst they may not have been used, they were registered on a phone mast during the whole time that they were inside the premises. And we've seen some digital material that suggests the use of certainly devices in the house. And I believe Yulia was also sending messages on her telephone, but that's from memory, I'm afraid. So. But certainly, in any case, their phones did not appear to be off for any period of time, including by Sturgess and Yulia's own statements, but supported by our digital findings. And of course, there is no CCTV of the trip the witness told us about, because that trip didn't appear to take place.
So when we identified the time at which Yulia had been originally in the house at 6 o'clock on Saturday evening,
Yes.
that was by the phone connecting to the router. So was the investigation able to determine whether the phones were connected to the router throughout that period in the morning?
So we certainly would have been able to, yes, and also it's important to remember that a mobile telephone also connects to a phone mast whenever it's in range of one as well. So there was nothing to indicate at all that those phones had been off the network or switched off at any point, certainly for any prolonged period of time, more than you might occasionally lose signal for a few seconds here and there.
And both Sturgess and Yulia's own accounts where they didn't switch off
Yes.
the phones that morning nor leave the house. Sturgess and Yulia were interviewed by police as part of the investigation. Is it right that the contents of those interviews haven't been made public until now as part of the inquiry where we're referring to them?
Yeah, I think it's also important when you consider the first few of these bullet points that we've just been discussing. Clearly, we haven't said publicly. This is the most we've ever said publicly about anyone's movements in this investigation, to be honest. So it's not unusual for them to have suggested in this report, the Russian embassy, that there are big gaps. So of course there aren't gaps, but we haven't spoken about them publicly and put that information into the public.
And is that partly because there's an ongoing criminal investigation into the suspects?
That is precisely why, yes.
And then, of course, there came a time when the inquiry was established.
Absolutely.
And so it was known that information was going to be provided in public as part of that public inquiry.
Of course.
Could you confirm that this inquiry has been provided with the interviews in full?
Yes.
And Sturgess and Yulia, we've seen, have each made recent statements to answer further questions posed to them as part of their evidence for the inquiry.
They continue to support where they can, yes.
And do we now have, with the assistance of the audiovisual presentation, precise CCTV with explanations of where the routes are inferred between the CCTV points?
Yes, that's correct.
If we could move to look at the third paragraph, please. The document says it's thus not clear when the Skripals left home in the morning, what they did thereafter, and whether they returned home before heading to the city centre after 1 p.m. This leaves open the question of whether the Skripals were at home at the time when chemical agent was allegedly put on their front door handle, which could theoretically happen between 12 and 12:30. Has that paragraph been addressed by what you've already said, or is there anything else you'd like to add at this stage on the subject of the movements of the Skripals? We'll come to the suspects later.
Yeah, I think we've covered it in pretty good detail. I would say this, that there is absolutely nothing that suggests any other alternative than they were at home during that period of time when Novichok was applied to the door handle of their house that I have seen.
Thank you. And if we could just deal with the fourth paragraph, where it says it's inconceivable that there would have been no CCTV camera on Mr. Skripal's house. Recordings from that camera would constitute the best and most convincing piece of evidence. Why does the UK not publish those? Commander Murphy, what did Operation Wadana ascertain about whether there was CCTV at 47 Christie Miller Road?
There wasn't any.
Thank you. If we could go to Sergei Skripal's recent account, INQ 006086, page 7, paragraph 27, please. If we can make larger, paragraph 27. This is Sergei Skripal's recent witness statement in which he addresses the question of whether he had any security arrangements. The paragraph begins, I've been asked whether there were security measures that could and should have been considered in my case. My comments on the list of suggestions presented to me are as follows, and I'd like to go to paragraph 27D, please. He says, I did not have a house security alarm or sensor-activated security lights, and I do not remember either of these being raised with me. And then E, please. CCTV was recommended, but I declined this because I did not want to make my house conspicuous or live under surveillance. So does that accord with what Wadana found in relation to there being no CCTV or other alarm system on the house?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. If we could then go back to the Russian embassy document, please, which was, yes, we have it, thank you very much. And finally, I want to deal with the fifth paragraph that says there's equally no information, either official or in the media, on any witnesses who may have seen the Skripals or the main suspects at any particular point around the time when the poisoning could theoretically take place. This is particularly striking with regard to the two suspects, as two strangers in a calm residential area would have certainly been seen and noted by locals. Concentrating on the Skripals for now, as I say, we'll come to the suspects later in the inquiry, did Operation Wadana in fact take a very large number of witness statements, which included those who saw the Skripals prior to or on the day of the poisoning, for example, neighbours, witnesses from the mill, ZZs, passers-by?
Yes, absolutely.
And so we have and will continue to seek your permission to adduce the key witness statements in this inquiry.
Yes.
There are a few further points made on the next page of the document, but those are going to be addressed in later tranches of evidence. So, Commander Murphy, thank you very much. Those are my questions for this tranche of the evidence.
Thank you.
So I wonder if we ought to take a break now, and there may be some additional questions after
Does
the
that
break.
fit with you, Mr. Straw?
So I'll only be about 1 minute.
Oh,
So I
in
don't-
that case.
In that case, I should think you'd be better off being 1 minute now.
Commander Murphy, just one minor issue. You mentioned the conclusion that your investigation had come to, that there was no Novichok on the door handle of Christie Miller Road on Saturday evening at about 6 p.m.
Yes.
And amongst the evidence that's relevant to that, you mentioned a number of items that Sergei touched on Saturday night, Sunday morning, within Christie Miller Road. Just two other items within the address that I don't think were mentioned. Is it right that Sergei said he took his diabetic medicine that evening?
I believe that's correct, yes. He took it out of a drawer, I believe.
Can you recall which room he took that out of?
I'm afraid I can't, no, not off the top of my head.
And you mentioned that he used the upstairs bathroom, he used the shower twice.
I believe so.
Can you recall, did he also say he used the toilet in the upstairs bathroom?
I don't recall whether he should have used the toilet, but I would imagine that to be the case.
So on the document that we went to earlier, INQ 005751, on page 10 of that, he indicated he used the document twice.
Which one? 50?
5751.
751, page 10.
Page 10.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Those are my questions. Thank you very much.
Then thank you very much, Mr. Straw. Does that complete the business for today, Miss Whitelaw?
It does indeed, sir.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for your help and indeed for the expedition. Very nicely managed. Thank you, Mr. Murphy. I dare say you're coming back again.
I am, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, we shall look forward to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
10 o'clock tomorrow morning, please.
All rise.